Okay, so welcome to Promises. So with promises, there are really two, uh, two sides to a promise. And we've covered this in week 1 and 2. We talked about promises and async. There is making a promise and there is using a promise. Now we know that making the promise, remember in our exam, make a promise that does a beep or does a timeout. Well, those are hard. Like actually making promises, those are not easy. And fortunately, that is not something we do really often at all in JavaScript as JavaScript developers. We very seldom make promises. We use promises that somebody else has made. So it is unlikely you'll be doing a lot of code where you have to do a new promise. Really quite rare. Okay. But using promises all the time. All the time. You'll be doing this in midterms. You've done it since Wednesday in your Postgres PG module as well, using a promise. And that's what we'll use today in our example. We have this midterm database, which is part of the midterm skeleton we'll be using. And this should look pretty familiar. We create a PG pool. We're using the PG module and we create a pool. So, and then we use some of these PG functions. So one common PG function that we can use is one we've used this week, which is a pool.query. And as we know, the pool.query function takes as a parameter a SQL statement, such as a select. So we'll give it select star users, which is one of the tables that you get in the midterm skeleton. All right, so we have pool.query. And let's see what this function returns. So we'll give a result equals our pool.query, and let's just log our result and see what we get. Okay, and it looks like we get a promise, and it is a pending promise, which means the promise at the point where we console logged it was pending. And as we know, JavaScript cannot be interrupted. So at this point on line 11, the promise cannot be resolved yet. So what we need to do is we need to query the promise and find out when it finished. And we use that using the then on the promise. So we have a pending promise. So we can query that promise and find out what the result was when the promise was resolved. So we can use the .then function of a promise, and that will tell us what happened. And .then takes as a parameter, call it res. It takes a function, a callback function that provides us with the information that was the result of the resolved promise. So we would go result and then a function. And we can console log res. It's like that. Let's try it again, see what we get. Well, this time we get quite a large object. So it looks like we got a pretty big object back from our promise. This object contains quite a lot of information. It contains things like the fields and an array of the fields. It returns how many rows were returned, row count. So it returns a lot of really interesting information. So let's console log, let's say res dot row count and see what happens. So let's run our function again. And I'll just clear the screen before we run this every time. Okay, and we got 2. So yes, there were 2 rows returned. So the contents of that object, although they're very interesting, really what we commonly use is res.rows, because that's what we're most interested in usually, res.rows. So Let's run that. And of course, we get 2 rows back because that's what I have in my users table, 2 rows. Okay, so it's important to note that the content of the res or the res object you get back from a promise depends completely on what module or function you called. In this case, I'm calling a PG pool.query. So I'm going to get back an object that is specific to a PG pool.query, which is that big object that we saw before, which looks once again like that. And that is unique to a PG pool.query. If I ran some other function, I would probably get back some other object. It's important to note that the query executes right there. It does not execute when the then is called. It starts executing right on line 10 as soon as the pool.query is called. And as we know, JavaScript is asynchronous. So a function like pool.query, being an asynchronous function, is going to start the query going and return immediately. It's going to blow right past line 10 to line 11. It'll start the query going, but the pool.query function will return very, very quickly and will be on line 11 before we know it. So by the time we console log our result, which we did previously, we get a pending promise. What we can do, we can actually then this result again. So if I went result.then again, I'm going to get the same information back again, but the query is not going to run again. The content of the resolved promise, which is the res in this case, is static. Once that query has run, this promise result contains some information, and I can query it as many times as like. The query does not run again. So if I query it 3 or 4 times, it's going to make no difference. I'm simply reading the same information from the already resolved promise. We don't commonly reread the content of a promise, but what we do quite often is we chain our thens. So what we'd normally see, and the way you'd normally run a promise such as this, is you wouldn't say const result equal, because that's fairly rare. You would go pool.query .then. And this is the pattern that you would normally see used for a promise. Your promise function, then on the next line, tabbed over .then. And it runs exactly the same way, and I get 1 row back. Now, with a .then, I can run another .then. Thens are chainable. In other words, I could go .then on this again and run .then again. The .then function of a promise returns another promise. And that's an important point I want to like you to remember. .then returns a promise. So I can do .then on it again. There's a funny term that I like. It's called thenable. So a promise object is thenable, which means you can then it. If it is not thenable, you can't then it. Oftentimes you may find in your code, and it may happen next week during the scheduler app, that you try to do .then on a return value of some function, and you get this thing has no then. You can't then it. So that gives you a clue that, oh, maybe this thing I'm getting back is not a promise. Another interesting thing about thens is when you have a .then and I console log res.rows, the return from a .then is available to the next .then. So if I return res.rows here, I'm returning res.rows. That res.rows is going to end up as the res in the next then. So the next then doesn't have res.rows, it just has res. Let's try that. So in fact, I'm going to add then 1, and I'm going to add then 2 to each of my thens, just so I can keep them straight as to which one I'm seeing. This makes my life easier. All right. There's then 1 and then 2. And you notice in then 1, I console logged res.rows, which is what I got back from my query. But in then 2, I just console logged res, because I know that my res is going to be whatever was returned from the previous dot then in the chain. So if I had console logged res.rows, I'm probably not going to get what I expect. I'm going to get undefined. There is no dot rows on an array. So it's important to remember what you have returned from your previous dot then, because that's what's available to the next then. And if I have another dot then in the chain, it's then 3. Let's see what I get. Because a then returns a promise. So what do we think we're going to get for my res in my then 3? We'll give that a try. Well, I get undefined. Why did I get undefined? Well, my then 2 then did not return anything. And of course, the JavaScript word for nothing there, or didn't do anything, or doesn't have anything, is undefined. So it's exactly what I expected. I expected to get undefined, and I did. Now you can return anything from a then, anything at all. You can return a number. If I returned 5, then that 5 is going to end up in that res. And if I run it, that's exactly what I get. I get a 5. And there is always another then. You can keep going forever. And people ask me, well, when does it end? Well, it never ends. You just stop writing thens. You don't need that many. In fact, you would commonly or not commonly write more than 1 or maybe 2 thens in the same function. It'd be quite uncommon. Normally you have 1 then, and that's really all you use. So we know that the return value from a dot then is available to the next dot then. And we can use that. Let's go ahead. What we're going to do is we're going to write a function now. We're going to wrap this query in a function. So let's make this a function. We'll call it get users there. And I'll wrap my query in a function. So now I have a function called get users that runs pool.query. All right. I'm going to call my function. Const equals get users. There. Okay. And let's log my result. And we'll see what I get. So I'm not going to console log this time because I want to console log outside of the function. So I'm going to just comment out my then there. Let's run this, and I get undefined. So why did I get undefined? Well, my function didn't return anything. Now my then did. Sure, I have a return inside my then, but my function, it didn't return anything from the function itself. This return was only for that dot then function, which is inside. My function itself, get users, did not return anything. So it needs to return something. Okay, so what will commonly happen is you'll write yourself a function that has a promise, and then you'll try to dot then it. Dot then, go. And we'll console out the result, or res. Once again, we don't normally say something equals get users, do we? So we do promise function dot then like that. And what can happen is we get an error saying, oh, can it cannot read property then of undefined. This is one of the most common errors you will see when working with promise. You go, oh, there's no dot then on this. Why is that? Because this function didn't return a thenable object. Love that word, thenable. My function needs to return something that I can dot then. Well, if only I had something inside this function that could be dot then, and I'd have something. I have the pool.query. I can return pool.query. That's thenable. So now my whole function is returning pool.query.then. Now, important to note that what my getUsers function is now returning is not pool.query. It's returning pool.query.then. So my function is actually returning the dot then. So getUsers is the dot then, and I'm dot thenning that dot then. So this is essentially a dot then chain, which is great. So if I console log my res, what I'm going to get is the return value from the previous dot then, which was this dot then in the function, which is res.rows. So if I've done it right, this should all work. Let's give it a try. And it does. Wow, first time too. Okay. So even though I did in fact wrap my pool.query in a function, it didn't matter because I still returned the dot then. So this is just a continuation of the chain. It'd be the same as having dot then and then dot then below it. I just wrapped the first dot then in a function. And what I've done here is I've removed the PG stuff or the PG specific implementation from the outside. So getUsers doesn't need to know that it was a PG pool being used. I could have returned simply a promise with any array of users. So, and this is what we do with functions. Oftentimes we abstract the details away. So now it's just, dot then, get res. I can even go dot rows or dot rows. There, so then dot rows. There, even more obvious. And I'll put a dot then as well. Or I can put rows there. Rows, just like that. So that's using a function that returns a promise. We'll just undo that for now because we're going to keep things simple. Okay, there's our original promise again with our then one. What we're going to do is we're going to handle when things go wrong. So what happens when things go wrong in a promise? It's called a rejected promise. And one of the things about promises is you got to be able to handle a rejection. A rejected promise would be when something went wrong. So let's say we had selects star from users rather than select star from users. Very clearly an invalid SQL statement. So I'll run that and watch what happens. And we get, oh, look at that. Unhandled promise rejection warning. Okay, means we didn't handle a rejection gracefully. This is also a very common thing you'll see. So to be able to handle this rejection, we use the catch keyword. It is dot catch. It's dot catch. And a dot catch looks an awful lot like a dot then. We oftentimes use the error, ERR, or name it as a parameter, just to distinguish it from the result or res from a dot then. And a dot catch, it's ERR. Let's take a look what it looks like. And we'll log ERR. We'll run it again. And we get another really long object. Let's just make it very clear that this did in fact come from our console log. We'll just type catch here and run it again. And where's our catch? There it is, right there, catch. So this is what we got back. And we got back a message, a stack, and another object from PG with information about the error that we got. Okay, so we can do is we can use the error parameter from our catch, and there's a couple of things we can use. A real safe one to use is the error.message. I found it's almost always there, so error.message is not a bad one to use. So we'll try that and look at syntax error at or near selects. That's useful. Let's try another one. How about from users 1, 2, 3? See if that exists. And that table doesn't exist. So it's reasonably helpful as far as error messages go. So I use error.message, which is oftentimes quite useful. Okay. So my catch will catch any error in my promise function. But there's more to it than that. Not only does the catch errors in your promise, let's watch what happens if I have a typo in my .then. Res.rows. That's clearly a typo. What's going to happen? Oh, my catch caught that as well. That's great. So not only does it catch any problems in my promise itself, it's going to catch any JavaScript errors. Because as we know, had I done this, JavaScript is going to really complain and probably crash on me. It says, wait a second, res not defined. I'm going to get a stack trace, and my JavaScript is likely going to just stop or really behave badly. But now the catch caught that error gracefully, which is really useful for me. But sometimes it can be confusing. Because what can happen is this. Let's say I'd put an error message like this instead. And I said, oh, error in query or user's query. Yeah, so I'm making my own custom message that I think is quite useful because I'm doing a select star from users. I'm not going to have some message that I don't want users to see. It's going to be a more, customized message for my application. Error in user's query. And I run this again. And I get, oh, what's that? Error in user's query. I must have done something wrong. Let's look at my query. What could possibly be wrong with my query? It looks perfectly fine. I'm going to go to PSQL maybe and try it. And it does work. It works in PSQL. So what on earth is going on? This is the double-edged sword of a catch, because sometimes the error is not where you think it is in a catch. It might be in your pull.query. Here, it's clearly not, because that's about as simple as it gets as a query. The error is actually farther down. So if you're not sure, you probably want to use error.message at least to find out where the error is. And I run it and I go, res not defined. Really? What's that? Oh yeah, man, typo. Ah, boy, who hasn't done that before? Res.rows, of course. So just one of those things to remember. Okay, with catch. Okay, there's a third keyword in the promise family, or a third function in the promise family. We have .then and we have .catch. Anybody want to guess what the third one is? There's a kind of the little brother of .then and .catch. Well, the keyword is, or the function is, finally. It's .finally. And .finally, once again, you can put that in the chain somewhere, and it runs. And it takes no parameters in its callback function. And what we use .finally for is for something that we want to run regardless if it was a then or a catch. I want to, for example, do some cleanup, or maybe do something that was always going to run. It doesn't matter if it was a then or a catch. So let's console log finally here and watch that happen. So finally, okay. And this should run. I have a .then and it ran as a finally. Let's put an error in our table like this. And does not exist. Finally, so that's great. Let's even put an error in our JavaScript. Res.rows. See what happens there. still has a finally. So the finally ran no matter what. The events trickle down. So if there's a catch, the catch trickles down or flows downwards to the next catch. So when an error happens, it will flow downwards until a catch catches it. The finally runs regardless of the then or the catch. Oftentimes we'll use finally for things we want to do, such as cleanup. So for example, if you look at my code here, if I run my program, you notice it's like, there's my finally, but there's a big delay. Like, what's going on? 5, 6, 7, it's like 10 seconds of delay until finally my OS comes back. What's going on? Well, this particular one is just one of those things that happens with Postgres. I'm declaring a pool here. So this pool has been open. It's available to be used. And I did a query on that pool. Well, Postgres didn't know I was finished with that pool. It's, well, there's your pool. Maybe you want to do something else because JavaScript is asynchronous. So I had a dot then. Maybe I want to chain another query in there, which we'll do in a few minutes as well. So it didn't close the pool for me itself. It left it open for, it looks like, around 10 seconds. So maybe I want to clean that up when my program is done. And I can do that. In this case, I can go pool.end, just like that. And that will tell the pool, look, I'm finished with you. I don't need anything else. It's okay to release your resources and just stop, and the program can end. And now if I run it, it runs and the pool closes and it exits right away. Okay. So let's talk about chaining a promise. Okay. Right now we've simply returned res.rows. And we know that whatever we return from a dot then is available to the next dot then in the chain. Let's make ourselves another dot then, just like that. And now we have a then too, and we'll console log res. And we do know that if we have res.rows here, we're going to get the rows here. We should get 2 users. And we do. Okay, or 2 users arrays. Okay, but what if I want to chain promises, do one promise and then do another promise? Well, as that implies, then do another promise. That's what I would do. I would then make another promise. So, for example, instead of returning res.rows, why don't I have another promise? Let's do a pool.query again. Let's copy that and put that right inside our dot then. There. Select star from users again. Now I've got pool.query. Now I could do a dot then here, couldn't I? Do the dot then with the res and console log res rows again. Now you notice this then never worked. I didn't get anything. Why did that happen? Well, let's look what happened. I had my dot then here. Then I console logged undefined because this then didn't return anything. Then the catch, then the finally fired, which closed my pool, which means this one never ran. So it wasn't able to run. It wasn't able to get the information. So we wouldn't normally put a then nested inside another then. What we'd normally do is we would do our pool.query and we'd return the next promise from our then. That is how you would normally see it done. So now we have our first then, console log res.rows, and we're returning another pool.query. So this is as another promise. And as we know, the return from a then ends up in the next then as its res. Well, the results of this pool.query is going to be another res.rows, isn't it? So this is now going to be res.rows because this is going to be another pool.query, which returns res.rows. Let's run it again, and we should get our then one and then two, but they're 2 different queries rather than being the same query. All right, so that's how we chain promises, one after the other. In fact, let's make this the more obvious. I have another table called widgets. There. Let's go select from users. And then once we console log the users, we will then run pull.query, which means our next then is going to get that. Let's give that a try. And it worked. My first then is my users. My second then is my widgets. Great. Okay. So there's then, catch, and finally. And when we chain promises, what we normally do is we return from the then another promise. And you can do things in order because sometimes you really want things to be done in a specific order. So let's start with something else, because databases are fun, but they're not the only thing in the world. There's more interesting things we can work on. Let's talk about using web APIs. Okay, well, a web API, and the word API is overused, but when we talk about APIs in web development, oftentimes we're talking about a REST service or a web service that returns REST. And that's what we're going to work on today. I'm going to make some HTTP calls to outside services. Remember the cats, the Belgian cat or the Siberian cat, or the ISS tracker. We had to do the ISS, get the lat long, get the IP address, get the times. We'll use promise as well. Those were called API calls or REST calls to the outside world. And we're going to use a particular library because you're going to use this a lot in a few weeks. It's called Axios. So I'm going to go const Axios equals require Axios. It's like that. Okay. Let's see if it runs, if I have it installed or not. And cannot find module Axios, so I should install Axios. So npm, and we'll install Axios, just like that. Very, very popular module for doing data fetching. Works in the front and the back end. It's commonly used in the front end. We will end up using this a lot in React Week, so it's something we get to know really well. Axios is going to be your best friend pretty soon. Okay, this should run again. And no errors. Okay, so let's try something with Axios. We're going to make a call to an REST API, some external URL. Let's take a URL, const URL equals, and we'll have a HTTP URL, https://api.kanye.rest. We'll try this one. That sounds like fun. So here's how you make an Axios call. It's Axios.get URL. Now you may be asking or telling yourself or asking yourself, doesn't this look an awful lot like jQuery's Ajax? And you'd be right. This is Ajax for everyone else. Ajax for the rest of us, if you will, because Ajax is jQuery specific. So we haven't got jQuery here. We have to use something else. We're using Axios. Axios.get URL. If I run this, of course, probably nothing's going to happen because I didn't .then my promise. So let's add a .then to this promise. And we'll say res. And let's console log our res again. There we go. Res. Okay, let's run this. What do we get? Wow. Look at that. Now, that is a really big object. So we get back this ginormous object back from Axios. Remember we talked about the object that you get back from a promise really depends on what you use to get it in the first place. Well, this is an Axios object. Look at the size of this thing. It's huge. Don't try this at home. Okay. So it's a huge object. All kinds of status text, all kinds of really interesting stuff I can use. So, but much like with the PG library, there's kind of one thing I really want to get like more than anything else, that is res.data. And how did I know that? I just happened to know that. I looked it up. Just like how did I know that PG, I use res.rows? Well, we looked it up in the PG documentation. Well, Axios, it's res.data. I just happen to know that now because I've used it enough. We look it up. Okay, so we're going to console log and see what we get. Okay. And look at this. My mother-in-law's Kris Jenner makes the best music playlist. Love it. Another one. George Bush doesn't care. Wow. 2024. Yes. 2024. Everyone. 2024. Yes. You go, Kanye. Okay. All right. So I'm nice at ping pong. So really cool words of wisdom from Kanye.rest. Okay. Keep your nose out the sky. Keep your heart to God and keep your face to the rising sun. Wow. Wow. What does that even mean? But it's awesome, right? I love it. Okay. It's like, that's just incredible. So this is great stuff, right? So res.data. Now I'm looking at this stuff and thinking, well, what's Kanye giving me here? Res.data contains the body, of course, of the API that sent back to you. So it sends you back a body. Okay. Well, that body looks like an object to me, doesn't it? It's got curly braces. So I'm getting back a body. And it looks like I'm getting back in that body a single thing with the key of quote. So it looks to me like I can go data.quote. There. Res.data.quote will give me what I want. Look at that instead. We probably can't top this one though. That's awesome. So we have to evolve. We do. Another one. Wow. Have you ever thought you were in love with someone, but then realized you were just staring in a mirror for 20 minutes? Has that ever happened? That's never happened to me, but I'm sure it happens to everyone. So, okay. So data.quote. Okay. So let's break down our log here. We have our res that comes from promise. So your dot then, that gives you the res. The dot data, that's Axios, right? Res.data, that comes from Axios. Res.data.quote, who's that come from? Anybody? Where's that quote come from? That's from Kanye. This is promises. You always get the res, that's built into the dot then. The data, that's from Axios. But the quote, that's right from Kanye. He's sending me a quote. Okay. So res.data quote. I can't get enough of these. Like, I really love my Tesla. Yes, thank you, Elon. Okay. Style is genderless. Okay. Yes, the next album drop. I know. I love Uzi. I be saying the same thing about Cheap Loves, but I feeling just like Uzi. What's Uzi? Is that like a gun or something else? Am I like right out of it? What's an Uzi? Anybody? Come on. Is that Uzi or Uzi One? Ah, sorry. Okay, another rapper. I knew that. I knew that. I knew it was a rapper, something of those rap guys. Okay, yes. Okay, so not that. Much like with any other great Liz to Uzi, what does that mean? Great Liz Uzi Vert. I'm sorry. That's all JavaScript to me. No, wait a second. JavaScript's better. I can understand that. So is his rapper name. Cool. Okay. So much like any other promise, we can do a catch as well, right? We can do catch. So we can add a catch, dot catch to this, dot catch with an error. And we can, there. Okay, now we can log our error. And we'll log error.message because we know that always works in promises. There's always a message. That's kind of, you get that for free. I'm probably gonna get a huge object. Let's take a look, by the way. I'm curious what the error message looks like. So let's mess this up. Let's make a really bad protocol. Let's go conye.rest. Sure. So obviously an error, unless Kanye exists. See what happens. Oh, another really big error object from Axios. Axios doesn't fool around. Let me tell you, they give you all kinds of stuff. Look at that. So probably I just want to get error.message. Let's take a look what error.message says. Run that. So not found. Not quite as helpful as PG, but it still tells me not found Kanye. Ah, I got an error with that, don't I? Okay, so there we go. Kanye. That's what I want. Okay. And culture is the most powerful. Oh, I love this stuff. Man. Okay. All right. So once again, had I made an error in my console log, and I put, console logs or losg, I would, of course, get my catch. Oh, log's not a function. There's more to promises than just this. We can, of course, chain promises. Yes, let's chain some Kanyes, because who will agree that one Kanye is not enough, right? Like, come on. Is like one quote just not enough. We need more quotes. We need a steady stream of Kanye words of wisdom. So we'll try this. Let's put another one here. Let's return another Axios.get. Axios.get URL again. And we'll just do our dot then on that. There. There. And another. There. We'll just stop there. Okay. And there. Okay. So now, as you can see, my thens are returning the result of that which is a promise. So my thens are returning a promise. That means this promise is available to the next then or the next catch, depending what happens. If, for instance, one of these URLs had a bad URL, the catch would catch it at the bottom. So I've got one, my original get, a second get, and a third get. Okay. And then console log. Let's try this. And wow. Okay. Manga all day. Yes, I will channel Will Ferrell when I'm at the daddy-daughter dances. Gotta love that. Yes. Okay. Whoa. Okay. Fur pillows are actually hard to sleep on. You know they are? I've heard that. They really are not comfortable to sleep on. And sometimes I push the door close elevator button on people running towards the elevator. Sometimes I just need my own space, my sanctuary. Yes. Who hasn't done that? Like, hold on, I'm pushing open for you. Run faster. Close, close, close. Oh man, I'm so sorry. Next one. Don't worry. Bye. Yeah, that happens all the time. Okay. So there's chaining promises. Let's actually make it more obvious because we didn't. Let's put our then here again. Whoops. Let's put the word then in here. So we got then console log our res.data. Let's console log the word then so we can see what's going on. There. There. Then one. Then one. There's another. That's another then. And there. So then one, then two, and then three. Two, and then three. Okay. Make it more clear what's going on here. There we go. Okay. Cool. All right. So there's Kanye. Okay. So that's chaining promises. One more thing we'll cover. We'll talk about promise.all. This is what we will be using coming up in 2 weeks in React. Promise.all. It's extremely useful. So right now I have a single promise. Executes one, then the next, and then the next. These are happening one after the other. Well, what if I want things to happen all at once? Well, hence the word all in promise.all. Okay. So I want to get 3 Kanye tweets and I want to fetch them all at once because even this is too painfully slow for me. I have to wait 2 milliseconds between each Kanye quote. I want them all at once. I just can't wait. So let's do it differently. Let's make ourselves some promises. So what I can do, I could do it this way. Const promise1. Wouldn't normally make a variable like this. Promise1 equals, and I'll say ax.get, just like that. And I'll make 2 more promises like this. Promise2, promise3. Once again, you wouldn't normally do it this way, but I'm doing it just for demonstration purposes. And now, instead of ax.get here, I'm going to go promise.all. It's a capital P promise using the promise class dot all, just like that. So promise.all. Now promise.all is slightly different in how it behaves. What it does, I'll move this out of the way, there. Promise.all takes as a parameter an array of promises. Takes an array. Well, I just happen to have 3 promises. I have promise 1, I have promise 2, and I have promise 3. Okay, now it has an array of promises. But that's not all. Promise all takes in an array, but you also get back a different res. What you get back is your res as an array. So now res is no longer my res.data. My res is actually an array. Oftentimes you'll see people using this notation. They'll say all to make it clear that they're not getting back a res, they're getting back an all array. So I'm getting back 3 things. You will get the reses back in the order that they were sent to the promise.all. So for instance, let's do res1 equals all 0. Once again, we wouldn't normally do it like this, but I'm doing it for demonstration purposes. And res2 and 3. I call it res1, res2, res3. Whoops, 1, 2, 3. And we'll call this 1, oops, 1 and 2. There's my 3 reses. Okay, well, I can console log my 3 res, just like this. Res1, sure. Res1, res2, and res3. And this is going to be my, I don't know, it's tediously long. Res1, oops, 2, and a res3. I'm just doing this to demonstrate that you're getting this these reses back as an array. Oh, res3.data right there. Okay. Okay, so now I'm giving promise.all an array of promises, 3 Axios.gets. Now remember we talked about what happens? Those start chewing away immediately. So those start right away. I give them all to a promise.all, and they'll get them all back at the same time once they all finish. So if promise 2 takes a little longer, maybe it's a slightly longer quote from Kanye rather than 2024, which is very short, the promise.all will not resolve until they're all finished, hence the name promise.all. Okay, let's try this. Any obvious errors in our promise? Oh, we'll leave that one out of the way. There. Okay, let's take a look. If we're lucky, we're going to get 3 Kanye quotes all in a row. And we do. I am one of the most famous people on the planet. Yes, my greatest pain in life is that I will never be able to see myself perform live. That is so sad. Really, that's awful. That's awful. Poor guy. I know. Anyway, all right. And we as people will ensure the well-being of each other. Yes. So 3 Kanyes all at once. It was great. Promise.all. But what happens if something goes wrong in one of my Kanyes, right? All right. Yeah, that was kind of wholesome, wasn't it? You're right. The last one was kind of wholesome. All right. The second one, okay. Yeah. But, I feel for the guy. That really is an awful thing. So what if something goes wrong in one of my promises? Let's say, let's do this. In fact, the way you'd normally see it is like this. You wouldn't normally see 3 promises. Yes, I'll never be able to attend my own lecture. That's right. I'll never be able to. That's right. I totally feel for Kanye. Totally. Oh, yeah. Well, he gets paid more for his lectures, I think. You would normally see it like this. What you would often see is it structured in this way. There. That and that. And you'd see it like this. Axios.get like that. There. Comma. And then, oops, and then 2 more of them. 1, 2, 3. That's normally how you'd see it. You wouldn't have the URL separate. You might have it separately, but you'd probably see it structured kind of like this: ax.get, and then you'd have your array, and then .then. Kind of the common way. This, by the way, is the way you'll see it in your React project as well. We'll be doing, coincidentally, we'll be doing 3 Axios.gets, but they're not going to be Kanye, sadly. But I do promise you, Kanye will make a reappearance in React Week a couple times with me. So yes, that means you're going to see me more in React Week. So this is the common way to do it. And it works the same way. For me, money is not my definition of success. Inspiring people is my definition. Yes, but money's kind of nice. So it's okay when you're a billionaire. So yeah, okay. And for pillows again. And love this. I thought of making a for loop. We should like a for I equals 1 to I equals like 100, and then make a promise.all, and then fire them all off to Kanye. We'll take a vote if someone wants to do that, but we can always make a loop of promises and promise.all. So, okay. So what happens if something goes wrong in our promise.all? I knew you're asking that question. I was thinking the same thing. What if something goes wrong in one of my promises? What's going to happen? Well, let's mess up one of our promises. Let's mess up the second one. Sure. Let's mess up the second one. So one of them's gone wrong. So, well, 2 are going to work, but one is going to fail. So what is going to happen in my promise.all? Well, sadly, with the promise.all, it's like that word all again. They all work, but if any fails, they all fail. That's just promise.all. So if any of them fail, we all fail together. That sounds like a Kanye quote. So yes, if anyone fails, they will all fail. And I can't tell. Like, I have no way of knowing which promise it was that failed. I don't know. Kanye.rest, which one? Now, obviously, that's pretty obvious, but maybe something different. I wouldn't know. Maybe one of these just simply gave me an error, and I have no way of knowing which one failed. Maybe Kanye cut me off because he knows I use this thing a lot. So I can't know. So promise.all does have that limitation, but it has a specific use case. You want to always fetch these 4 things, and you don't want it to succeed if any one of them failed. So you want it to fail. You want to know that group of things that I just did there that failed, and I want to handle them together as a group. So that's what promise.all is best for. There is another one called all settled. We won't cover it today. It's quite new. Let's look for all settled. It's a really cool one, and you can find out. Go on. Let's go promise all settled. There it is. So I do encourage you, if you can use one of these ones, it's pretty cool. Go smaller. Promise all settled. There. And you get back an object. What's the then? And yes, you get back a status, right? You get back an array with 2 things in it. It's now an array of objects, not just an array of values. I get back status fulfilled and the value. So unlike in a promise.all, where I just got back the res or the res.data, now my res contains 2 things. It contains my data, value, that'll be my data there, and a status, which one was resolved. And if one fails, you still get back that, which is really useful. So we don't cover this a lot in bootcamp, but it's one of the newer ones. It's kind of cool one to use. So, but let's try one kind of interesting exercise here. Knowing what we know about promises, thens, and catches, let's see what's going to happen if one of my Kanye's fail in my E, but I still want to know which one failed. What can I do? Is there anything I can do to find out still which one of these failed? I want to get this promise.all and bend it to my will, that it will still give me my 2, but not, fail for them all. Well, it turns out, yes, there is. It's a bit of a trick. And this is what we used to do before the all settled came out. We did this. Now I'm going to type something here, and let's see if we can figure out what I'm doing here. Okay, we're going to go catch E, just like that. What is that? there, and there. Okay. So what am I doing here? What am I doing here? And I know that my second one's going to fail. So let's just console log the e object, which is my res dot message. Pretty sure. Take a look. Okay. So let's see what happens. This might be wrong. We'll give it a try. Res there. Res 1, 2, 3. There we go. Okay. Okay. Well, look at that. Huh. Worked first time. That's the first time that's happened, actually. Worked first time. I got back my 2 quotes and my error. My memories are from the future. I knew it. I knew the guy was in the future. Who didn't know that? Seriously. Okay. So hang all day. What was that? Sorry, manga all day. Okay. And not found. So I managed to trick promise.all into giving me back kind of what I wanted. I had to handle it differently, obviously, because I knew that res2 was going to fail, but I kind of got my promise.all to work. But why did this work? Why did this work? Who wants to hazard a guess? Why did this particular trick work? Well, knowing what we know about thens and catches. What do we know about a catch? Remember? Then, that's right, then runs after a catch. But how did I get my stuff in here, right? What happened? Well, we do know that the return value from a then and whatever you return from a catch also is available to the next then in the chain. So not only is the return value from a then available to the next then in the chain, the return value from a catch is also available. And what am I doing here? Well, this is kind of shorthand. This really should be, error, and then curly braces, and then return error, right? Error, just like that. So I'm explicitly, obviously, returning something from the catch. And the next then in the chain is that. So that return value from that is going to be available to the next then in the chain. I've just done the really shorthand using the arrow notation, which means no return, no curly braces, E, fire the E back. So the catch, if you get the E, send it right back. Don't even look at it, just fire back. So now that E is going to be here as one of my reses is there. So because we know that the return value from a catch is still going to be a promise, and it's going to contain whatever's in there, the next thing can catch it, the next thing gets it, which is really exciting. So I should get out more. Okay. Okay. So that's how that works. Any questions so far on this stuff so far? Catch returns a promise. Yes, a catch does return a promise just like a then does. Okay. Anybody have Kanye? Do we feel like doing a loop of Kanyes? Who wants to do a loop of like 50 Kanyes? Let's get hands up. We'll do I promised that all of 50 Kanyes. No one? Oh, I got one hand. See? Yeah. Antoine's Kanye. Come on. And we'll do a loop of 50 Kanye quotes. Yes? Yes? Okay. Oh, 2 votes. Okay, we'll do it. Let's try this. So what we're going to do, we're going to build ourselves a quote. Let's take a look. So we'll go const. We need an array, don't we? Const array. We'll call this promises equals new array. Okay, and we'll do promises. We're going to build ourselves an array of promises, just like this. And we'll do a for loop. It's going to be, of course, this kind. Let I equal 0. I very seldom do these, as you know. Equals, do 50, 50, I plus plus. Wow. Okay, let's try this. And we're going to do promises dot push an Axios dot get of this. Wow, we're living on the edge. Like that. Okay. All right. Project. Looks right to me. What do you think? Okay. Let's promise.all with our promises. Okay. We got our then. Well, now, of course, I'm going to have to do this a bit differently, aren't I? Because now my all is now an array. So I'm going to use my all array for of, I know it's an array, there, for res of all. Yeah, great choice. Res of all. Log res.data. Dot quote. There. Hopefully we haven't made any obvious errors. Our catch should catch it though. Any errors in here? Okay, what do we think here? Let's look at this. I'm going to be building 50 ax.gets in promises. So far, so good. Then I'm going to run my promises and I'm going to get the alls. See if this works. Hold on to your hats. Oh, whoa, wow, wow. Hold on. Hold on. Quote. This is awesome. Come on, do it again. I love this. There we go. Come on. Put a little wider. Who doesn't love that? Come on. That's like overload of wisdom. Wow. Okay. Anyway, all right. Uzi. Who's Uzi again? This Uzi thing. Man. Okay. All right. So that's the talk on promises. Kind of cool stuff. Well, I think it's cool. So we talked about then and catch. Key takeaways from today. Return from a then, right? Real important. Remember, we wondered why in this PG are we returning pg.query? Well, because that is going to be available to the next then, whoever thens our function, because we had a function that returned pg.query, and then inside that then we returned res.rows. That means the next then in the chain gets that res.rows. That's why we did it. So remember that a then, whatever you return, ends up as a promise in the next then, or catch if it failed. Okay, that's kind of the big takeaway. And if anyone ever asks you in an interview, because by the way, I ask this in all my interviews when I'm interviewing people for real jobs, I say, well, what are the 3 things we use in promises? What are the 3 keywords that we use as part of a promise? What are they? They usually get then, quite often catch, but a lot of people don't get the word the finally. So then, catch, and finally. Okay, all right. That's it for today. So have a great rest of your evening.